A while back, I found these slabs on the forbidden marketplace where most people would tell you not to buy them. And I finally have a use for them because my sister and her fiance just bought a house. And the dining space is, empty. The good news is they're pretty open to my design ideas, but they did have one rule.
No epoxy.
Yeah, I wasn't gonna do that anyway. So with the wedding just around the corner, the question is, can I build the best gift ever?
Oh yeah.
These slabs are awesome, but they are far from perfect. First off, neither of them are flat, and to make matters worse, they aren't the same thickness. So I need to fix both of those things. And because I'm making a full-size table, my old slab flattening sled just isn't gonna cut it. So I made a small upgrade here. Now the whole goal is to get away from the kind of janky DIY setup that I have. So I decided that I'd put a little bit of extra time in this and build a proper frame as well. This allows me to do a couple of things. First off, this frame is what the sled wheels move along. So keeping it perfectly flat is super important. But as long as I do that right, I won't have any sagging in the center like my current workbench does. And like I mentioned before, I can flatten much wider material now. Plus, I can disassemble this and store it easily. Now that I've got this all set up, I can finally start flattening. I'm starting with the smaller, thinner slabs so that I know exactly what thickness I'm gonna need to take the other one to. And I'm not necessarily trying to get these perfectly flat or take them to final thickness. I'm just trying to get them workable because I'm assuming that once I connect these two slabs, I'm gonna need to flatten them again. But this is a good starting point. Earlier, I alluded to the fact that I got these off of Facebook Marketplace. And I've never done this before because you never really know what you're getting when you do that. But these were the rejects from an Amish community in Iowa. So these have been properly dried and they're good enough for me. All right, I am excited to finally be moving away from the flattening of the slabs and into the non-epoxy river portion of the table, which is basically just how I'm going to attach the two slabs in the middle. And I promise I'm gonna give a full rundown of what I'm doing and how I'm doing it, but I still have some options left for the exact execution. So for now, just know that I need to cut down a bunch of these maple strips to about 1/8 of an inch, and I think I need like 40 of them, so I'm gonna get going on that. I'm starting with these 4 pieces, and I've got them cut to a little over 1.5 inches, which is about the width of the tabletop. Now, these are obviously close to 1 inch thick, and I need to get them down to about 1/8 of an inch. So I have the difficult job of trying to resaw something that's about 9.5 feet long. I'm not so sure I can do it, and I'm also a little bit worried about how I'm going to get it done here in the garage. I'm gonna have to get creative with the layout to get this much length through the bandsaw. Okay, this works. Very encouraging. I promise that I'm not trying to hide what I'm gonna do with these, but if you think you know, pause and leave it in the comments now. I've resawn those 4 pieces into these 12, and they look pretty good, but I'm afraid that it's not going to be enough. So I'm going to cut down a few more before I put these through the planer to square and flatten them. Plus, I have a couple of ideas on how I'm going to incorporate this design element throughout the project, so I'm going to need more for that anyway. I think I have enough now, but I've got to get these a little more uniform and a lot more flat. So I'm going to run these things through the planer to get them down to that 1/8 inch width. So I was wrong. I did not have enough of these strips. In fact, I had to double what I originally thought. I got so bored doing this that I couldn't imagine how boring it would be for you to watch. And just for your entertainment, I think I tried to be a little too creative with some of these shots. That was a close one. With all of this laid out now, you may be starting to get an idea of what I'm going to do. But I'm sure that you don't know exactly what I'm going to do because I don't know either. I'm basically down to 2 ideas on how I can connect these 2 slabs with the maple strips. Since I can't make up my mind which direction I want to go, I've decided to get another opinion from someone that knows my sister just as well as I do and has given plenty of advice on this channel before. All right, so the toughest part of this project is that they asked for no epoxy, and I've come up with 2 design options. So in both options, the slabs are obviously going to go on the outside. But with option 1, I would basically glue up all of the strips to a perfect rectangle, and then I would cut the outsides of that rectangle to match the natural current edge of the slabs as they are. In option 2, I would basically recut the edge and exaggerate some of the movement, but still match the grain. Then I would match that edge to the opposing face, and the maple slats in the middle would then bend with it. What do you think? So essentially, you're gonna have all of these together, bending to the movement that I would manufacture a little bit, but not a ton, versus gluing all of these up and routing the edge of this to match what it currently looks like.
So on option 2, are you going to have a flat 90-degree angle?
Yes.
That's the unmatched. So I would go with option 2, but it makes a difference on which one you're gonna pick. That one's more exaggerated on that side. And then having to cut this one to match this may mess with your distance over here.
Right. If you look at where your hand is, see how that grain right here really goes out, not the edge, but the grain. I could bring this in and follow this grain pattern, right? And then when I go back this way, this really goes out and I can bring that back in.
But then you gotta cut this guy to match.
I would flip this around each way to see the best way that the grain would work. It won't be as natural to one slab. The movement within this grain will still match up pretty well.
I think the more character you got with the waves is good. This is gonna be a trick, dude. I think option 2, but
Good.
depends on how you make it work.
All right, let's do it. You heard the man, option 2, and we are not hesitating to move forward. The first thing I gotta do is draw the line that I wanna cut on this bigger slab. To get this line exactly the way that I want it, I'm using something that I've learned from tattoo artists. If you've ever seen or heard of a freehand tattoo, what that usually means is that the artist isn't using a stencil. Instead, they start with a layout using a light-colored Sharpie. Then directly on top of that, they'll do a more refined version in a darker colored Sharpie. They'll do this a few times until they get the line work exactly how they want it with the black Sharpie. And those are the lines that they know to follow when doing the tattoo. So yeah, I'm basically just a tattooer with a jigsaw. Anyway, earlier you heard my dad ask if the new exaggerated live edge would be at 90 degrees. And it's a good question because none of this works without that. However, my cut was definitely not 90 degrees. So to clean that up, I'm just taking the pattern and compression bit to square off that edge. And after sanding it a little bit, I'm pretty happy with how this looks. But I'm not quite as happy about the next step in this process. I'm honestly just scared because I somehow have to transfer this new exaggerated live edge onto the second slab. And as is just about everything in woodworking, there's more than one way to do this. But here's what I came up with. I started with a brass bearing and a 1/2 inch upcut spiral bit. This allowed me to perfectly trace the new live edge onto the second slab. And I'm obviously not going to cut all the way through the slab using this method. In fact, all that I'm really trying to do is leave an indentation so that I know where the line will be. And from here, it's really similar to the first slab, where I'm just cutting off the excess with the jigsaw, then using the pattern bit to cut it all flush. As I start to route and clean up this edge, you're probably seeing the same problem that I am. I did not cut deep enough into this slab to get the full thickness of it. You can see that I still caught some of the live edge because I was trying to preserve as much of the width as I could. And this is obviously a problem because this is the piece that the maple slats are supposed to attach to. I still have a little thin piece here at the top. As I assemble this tabletop, I'm gonna have to figure out something, but for now, let's put these two together and see how we did with this cut. Now, obviously, the maple strips are going to go in between these two slabs, but I would absolutely be lying if I told you that I knew that this was going to work so well. I'm honestly so excited. This looks awesome. At this point, I've come far enough with the slabs and the maple strips to do a test run dry fit of the clamp up. I just want to make sure that with 5 inches of maple strips, they're still going to bend the way that I need them to. A couple of challenges here. Number 1, I need more clamps. Number 2, I need to add some lines to these slabs to make sure that they're aligning exactly the same and all the waves are adding pressure equally on both sides. Which leads me to number 3. I don't know if those first 2 things will alleviate this issue or not, but I'm thinking I might need to steam this maple to get it to bend a little bit easier. At the end of the day, I have enough to go ahead and outline the edges of the table so that I can cut these slabs down and get the final dimensions of the tabletop. The main reason why I've been trying to get this tabletop down to final size is so that I can get the dimensions and start working on the base. And what seems to be a pretty basic design can quickly get very complicated. There's only 3 different pieces that make up this base. There's the stretchers, the angled horizontal arms, and the 4 vertical pieces. We'll get started with these pieces first. So at this point, you know that my sister and her fiance gave me a single rule. No river epoxy. Okay, great. But what they don't know is that I also have a rule for them. Up to this point, all they've seen is a rough sketch of the base and the slabs before they were flattened, which means that there's still an element of surprise left because they're not allowed to see this table until it's in place in their dining space. And from one impatient person to another, I know my sister's fiance is struggling with this. He wants to see it. He wants to know, is the river idea actually gonna work? What's the finish gonna look like? Am I even gonna like this thing? Well, don't worry. When we capture their reaction, we'll find out if they actually like it or they're just good actors. I've got all the parts for the base cut down and milled and almost ready for assembly. But before I can get to sanding, I've decided that I'm going to change 2 things about the design. The first is that I don't want the outside vertical pieces of the legs to look so flat. So to make them a little bit more dynamic, I'm going to add a 1-inch taper on the outsides of those legs. Luckily, that doesn't change any of the angles or joinery of the inside. It just makes the outside look a little bit more refined. The second is less about design and focuses more on the foundation and the structural integrity of the base. As it stands right now, the only vertical pieces are on the outsides of the base, and I'm a little bit worried about the weight in the middle of the table. So I'm gonna add 1 more vertical piece in the center of the tables that will attach to the top and bottom runners right in the center. Okay, now we sand. So the whole purpose of this video is to build the absolute best table that I can build for my sister as a wedding gift. And I could try to get really deep with the meaning of this table and how one slab represents my sister and the other represents her fiance. And of course the river in the center is the marriage holding them together. Hey, that's actually pretty good. Instead, my sister actually has a pretty cool story, and I thought I would share a little bit about that. And even at the risk of my sister actually watching this whole video and hearing this, I'm just going to be honest. She's actually pretty cool. You see, my sister was adopted. And not only that, she was adopted from Russia. And when we got her, I was only 6 years old and she was about 18 months. My parents had to travel to Russia to get her, and when they brought her back, there was an adjustment period. I had never had a sister before. Oh, and I guess she had some adjusting to do as well. We still talk about the first night she spent in our house, and we had to take her shoes off to put her in the crib, and she bawled her eyes out. She had never had her own pair of shoes. But these, along with being bullied by 3 older brothers, are the experiences that shaped her. She's the most resilient person I've ever met. Send her to her room, she'll entertain herself. Struggled in school, but still got her master's degree. First fiance didn't work out, found a new one. Okay, that last one was a joke, but she does deserve a nice table. With these 5 main pieces assembled, I can move into the final steps before assembling the entire base. And I've got a few things that need to be done here. So after giving these another round of sanding, I can start to shape the insides of all of these pieces. And I'm going to use a similar process to what I've used in the past, but this time I'm going to try to focus on using the router table. So starting with the rabbet joint, I'll take a pass on either side of each one of these pieces. Then I'll clean out the rest of the material with the compression flush trim bit. And once all that's done, I can start thinking about edge profiles. And my plan here is to do a pretty good size round over on the inside and outside of all of these pieces. So if you've watched my channel before, you know that this is pretty close to the process that I use to shape any of my table legs. The only difference is that I'm using the router table instead of hand routing it. The mechanics are pretty much the same, where I use the rabbet bit to set the edge and then the compression bit to flush trim. But to be honest, they're both super repetitive processes that aren't very fun, so I'd say get it done however you want. We are about halfway through this project and video, and as usual, I just want to take 2 seconds to say thank you so much for watching. Your views and the time that you take to watch these videos are super important to me, and I don't take it for granted, so I appreciate it very much. If all you ever do is watch one of my videos, trust me, that is more than enough for me. However, if you'd like to subscribe or like the video, I'd appreciate that as well. Okay, these base parts are done. Let's move on. It's time to glue up the tabletop and find out if this maple slats river thing is gonna work. So here's the plan. First I got some more clamps. Then I'm setting up 2 workstations. The first is where the clamps and slabs will go and the glue up will happen. The second space is where I'm going to lay out all of the maple slats. And as you can see, both workstations have a plastic cover because the adhesion that I'm going to use is Total Boat's high performance epoxy. So the plan is to get the epoxy in this tray and roll it onto the slats. From there, I can bring them over little by little to the clamping station and see if we can get this thing tightened down. I have no clue if this is really gonna work. With the entire project dependent on this process working, I'm pretty nervous right now, but we didn't start this channel to do the easy things or the things that we've done over and over. It's about trying new things, failing sometimes, and learning new things. Obviously, there's more than one way to do this glue up, or epoxy up, I guess. First off, I just love Total Boat. 5% off affiliate link in the video description. But this is also the right choice for this situation, mostly for open time. Now, I'm still very nervous about whether I can get all of this done before the epoxy starts to set, but it's still much longer than a regular wood glue. Also, I'm basically treating this as a bent lamination, and the epoxy does a much better job preventing spring back when I take the clamps off. Well, my heart is pounding. I am absolutely sweating. That was a lot, but we got it clamped up. I'm pretty happy. There's definitely some cracks in here that I can see, but I've also got some cracks in the tabletop. I'm gonna go ahead and add some epoxy to those areas, try to get it stabilized. I really wasn't worried about any spring back, but for as much as I had to tighten that, I'm more worried about it now. Luckily, I only had to wait about 24 hours before I could remove the clamps and find out the fate of this tabletop. And as you can tell, I'm inspecting it pretty closely after removing each clamp. The good news is I can put my worries about spring back to rest, at least for now. The problem is I have a whole host of other issues. There are a lot of high and low points on the tabletop, and the bigger slab has started to cup a little bit. So I'm hoping that by going through the flattening process again, all of those problems will be alleviated. Because I'm not completely certain of how strong the bond is between the slabs and the strips, I decided to be a little bit more strategic about this process. So first I'm hitting all the high spots on the top so that I can flip it and flatten the bottom and get the C-channel installed, which was a great plan until, forgot about this little guy. Remember earlier when I didn't quite take enough off the second slab? Hopefully this amount of epoxy on the bottom of the table isn't breaking my sister's rule. Anyway, another 24 hours of waiting and I can get back to flattening the bottom and installing this C-channel. Originally, I had worried that if I tried to pick up the table from one side to flip it, it might crack in the middle, which is why I'm doing this a little bit out of order and installing it before completely flattening the top and the bottom. Now, obviously, I had to flip this one time before installing the C-channel to get to the bottom of the table, and I was pretty surprised at how rigid the top was. That epoxy held strong and didn't move at all. So shout out to Total Boat, because I think that's one thing that people miss is just using an epoxy as an adhesive, not just for a deep pour river. Speaking of epoxy river tables, I did want to mention one thing. This whole no epoxy approach is not meant to be a knock on river tables at all. Honestly, I have a couple of those projects coming up in the future. So I just see this as an alternative to epoxy. But I'm curious about what you all are thinking. Tell me in the comments if you think this idea is just kind of gimmicky, or if there's a future in doing these sort of inlays in between slabs. Okay, so the last thing to do here is to flatten the top before turning our attention back to the base. All of the edge profiles are now finished, but I'm going to call a little bit of an audible when it comes to the design and assembly of these pieces. Originally, where these three pieces were going to connect, I was just going to cut some 35-degree angles, glue these together, and then attach them to the stretcher piece. And I really don't like the harsh angles that creates. I mean, there's basically no hard angles anywhere on the rest of the project. So I've decided that I'm gonna try to make a connector hub piece to bring all three of these together. And I'm gonna start by creating a template. There's definitely more than one way that you can go about doing this. But the final pieces that need to be created from this template were almost 3 inches tall. I wasn't really sure if I was going to be able to template route these pieces or if this was just going to end up being more of a prototype. So I tried to build this in a way where the steps could be duplicated on the final pieces. Hence all the repeatable angle cuts on the table saw. I need to make 4 of these connector pieces, and since the top is basically hidden and no one will see it, I'm going to use that as sort of a test run and just use some plain maple. But for the bottom pieces, I have something different planned. So here you're going to see what I meant by repeatable steps, because there's no way I was going to be able to template route these. They're just too tall, and the angles on the end grain can be very difficult to route, which means that I'll be making all of these by hand, which is where all those repeatable steps come in handy. Because to be honest, nothing between the three ends of this matter at all. The only thing that really matters are the three angles. Okay, so back like 20 minutes ago when I was cutting out all the strips, I told you that I had a plan to use them somewhere else on the table. So to connect that design element to the base, the bottom hubs are going to be made out of the same strips of maple. Because why not make it more difficult to try to have a piece with perfect angles out of a bunch of tiny pieces glued up? That makes sense, right? All jokes aside, I had to think pretty hard about this one because I was starting to worry that it might be a little bit too much. Something that I think about a lot when it comes to design is the power of a design feature versus a design element. And I know those are just words, but I try to take into account the strength of a certain design aspect. If there's a particular part of a design that draws a lot of attention, maybe that thing should only be used once. But when it comes to furniture, there's also design pieces that may be strong enough to stand out, but not stand on their own. And in my opinion, the maple strips fit that definition. And this particular design element needs a little bit of support. And no pun intended, I thought the base was the best place to do that. Okay, so after finally getting all of these pieces sanded and prepped and ready to go, I can finally get ready to do the assembly. Now, I'd be lying if I told you that I wasn't a little bit nervous about all of these pieces coming together. I was confident enough to clear out all of the domino mortises without even doing a dry fit, but don't let that fool you. I wasn't feeling particularly optimistic about all of these handmade pieces coming together perfectly. But I'll spare you the suspense, because there were no issues with this base glue up. And yes, I am just as surprised as you are. Before jumping into the last few steps of this project, I just wanted to acknowledge some of the changes that are happening in my shop towards the end of this video. There's a lot of things that are moving around in the background and some new machinery, and I'm basically just pointing all of this out because there's gonna be some pretty big changes for the shop between this video and my next. So stay tuned for a whole new look there. Alright, so as you can see, this base is really coming together, and there's only a couple of things that I need to do before putting the finish on it. I've got quite a bit of sanding left to do, plus you may have noticed that the hub pieces don't have the same round over edge profile as the other pieces, so I've got to take care of that as well. So it's back to the router and, of course, more sanding to clean it up. But after that, we finally get to see these two pieces come together for the first time, because I've got to figure out how I'm going to attach the top and the base. And I've really started to fall in love with these threaded inserts and bolts. Getting these set up and working properly is probably more work than other methods, but these are completely concealed when they're done, and they hold everything really tight. Plus, when you use an oversized hole for the bolt, there's a little bit of room for expansion and contraction. The only thing that you have to make sure and do is line up these inserts with the holes perfectly. As I get close to the finish line of this project, I'm starting to realize how much of a risk it really was. And I'm not trying to be overly dramatic about all the places that this could have gone wrong, and I'm definitely not trying to be arrogant like, hey, look at me, look what I pulled off. I'm just sort of pausing to realize that I had an idea and just went for it without really taking the precautions that I probably should have. But I guess to some degree, that's how trends are started. Okay, maybe that was a little bit arrogant. I don't think this is going to be a new trend. In fact, I don't even know if I would recommend it. You definitely shouldn't try this and share it with all your friends on Instagram and YouTube, helping to replace the long-standing king that the epoxy river table is, and naming me the grandfather and founder of this design. But yeah, like I said, no arrogance here. Anyway, as I started to put the Rubio finish on this table, I started thinking about the delivery and capturing the reaction of my sister and her fiance. I mean, it is a little bit awkward, right? Here I am presenting you with a table that took me a month to build, and you're probably feeling like you need to react a certain way. On top of that, you also know that the whole thing is going to be filmed. It sort of makes me feel bad for them, like I shouldn't even be doing this. Anyway, here's their reaction. Oh, wow.
Love it. Yay!
10 out of 10. That looks really good.
I love it.
Cool.
It's your wedding present.
Thanks.
Yeah, happy marriage. You could throw it away if you don't like it.
Honey, shut
Or
up.
marketplace. This is incredible.
We'll have it forever. How long
Yeah.
did it take?
How long?
Yeah.
I think it was like 5 minutes.
I just like how there's no one else has this one.
And just like that, another project in the books. I feel pretty confident that they liked the table, and if nothing else, they certainly appreciated it. Once again, thank you so much for watching and supporting. I appreciate it more than you can imagine. Oh, and here's 8 full seconds of my dad appreciating his design decisions. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed that video. If you did, I've got some others that you may enjoy as well, like this one where I tried to surprise my wife with a new walnut dining table, or this very custom white oak desk. Thanks again. Stay tuned for next time because I've got a really cool project planned.